everyone, it's Norm from Tested here in the contest room of WonderFest 2023. Now I'm joined by and finally meeting in person Bill Krause. Bill, AdmiralBuck, good to meet you in person.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure. We are so thrilled to be here and to check out some of the models that you brought to the show. This is your 8th year exhibiting.
Yes.
Now people who follow Star Trek may have seen some of your work being shared on social media because you do incredible ship builds, original ship designs, and even some work on the latest season of Star Trek Picard.
That's correct, yes.
Well, let's start with some of the original work because that's what we have next to us.
Sure.
What is this, the USS?
This is the USS Excalibur.
Excalibur.
And it's a 1/350 scale refit of the TOS Excalibur that would have been damaged in the episode Ultimate Computer, where the Enterprise was in battle with 4 other Constitution-class ships and got heavily damaged. So this is a depiction of a late refit TOS era Starship. It has a little bit of a blend of like the motion picture in it, a little bit of TOS, a little bit of my style. So I like to live in this kind of, between era, between TV and movie era. And so this is designed in SketchUp and eventually 3D printed as parts and assembled. It uses some original 1/350 scale model parts, like the primary hull comes from a
little bit of kit bashing.
The available kit that you can buy.
Yeah.
To kind of ground the kit. And this is obviously an Enterprise or a Constitution class ship, but a little different.
Yeah.
So I've added a lot of my own design into it, and
Well, when you do a build up, whether it's something of your own design or a really built out version of an existing kit, you're decking it out with all sorts of lights, with reinforcement. Can you walk through some of that process that you do and some of your ethos in shipbuilding?
Well, I like my ships to be fairly sturdily built. And when you're 3D printing a model, you can't rely on the parts to kind of hold themselves together. So I usually build it over a brass armature, which is soldered together, and it supports everything within the model, and it supports it to the stand. And of course, the pylons and the nacelles are very fragile in starfish, so you need as much help as you can get to hold those engines in place and stay that way, because this could be very heavy. And you also want to be able to run the lighting through the base. So the stand is a hollow brass tube. The wire runs up through that and then powers the ship internally through that kind of hidden base or hidden stand.
So you don't get any of that telltale pylon sagging over time, which is such a thing we have to contend with when doing an off-the-shelf kit. However strong your connection is, it's never strong enough. Never strong enough.
Right. You overbuilt it.
Exactly. So you designed this as a 1/350th scale model to be in line with that TOS era ship, modernizing it. Can you tell me about that SketchUp process? And do you start with a physical sketch? Do you do all on the computer in SketchUp?
A little bit of both. I mean, I'll have some ideas that I'll sketch on paper first. Just got to get some rough ideas down. And then once I get an idea that I like, I'll then go into 3D modeling and start building from the sketches. And you can spend anywhere from a few weeks to a month until you really hammer out what you want. And you can do it in components. You can build the engines first and get that fleshed out pretty well. And what's great with 3D is you can rescale certain elements of the ship proportionally, so it all starts to look good. You can spin the model in all axes, so it looks good from every angle before you start printing and building it. So you kind of want to like it before you get to the printing stage, that you like what you designed, looks good from all angles, and then you're good to go.
Well, both in the design process and in like 3D printing a part, you run into the opportunity for never-ending detail. So where do you find yourself wanting to limit yourself in terms of like how small, how detailed the surface can be? Because you want to keep the Star Trek aesthetic, where it's not like Star Wars, you have tons of surface detail.
Right. There's not a lot of greebles I have to worry about when it comes to these TOS areas. It's very clean design, very smooth. So it's all about shape and geometry and flow of line, and so you can be really pretty simple with things and worry about some of the smaller details later. You can create them or add them at a much later stage, but really trying to get the rough forms down, because when you're printing something that large, you're going to get a little bit of faceting of some details. So you're going to spend a lot of time kind of honing that hull once you get it from the printer to kind of smooth it all out. There's a lot of body work going on, and then you can get the embellishing stage of adding any kind of extra greebles and things, level of detail if you want to do that.
I notice panel lines, and people usually maybe think of TOS ships having a ton of panel lines, but as we know, the refit era, the motion picture era, those did have some wonderful contours on the
Sure.
side. I'm noticing that,
Yeah.
that here. But you chose maybe no Aztecing on here as
No
a paint
Aztecing.
finish.
I mean, it's an option you can do, and there's some subtle Aztecing. I mean, there's some subtle panel
Shading, I
variation,
see, yeah.
shading, and of course the panel lines themselves kind of help define a shape. As on the primary hull, you'll see some concentric
Yes.
rings and other vertical lines. It's not identical to what you would see ever, maybe, but you know, it was just to try something different. You know, again, leaning towards the motion picture era where you see a lot of panel lines, whereas you may not see as many on the TOS era. And these and the ones on the primary are done with a carbide tip pen. So actually they're etched, they're carved into the model, they're scribed into the plastic,
I see.
which is pretty difficult and nerve-wracking when you're trying to do that.
Yeah.
There are other ones that I heard are just done with a mechanical pencil, a very sharp pencil. So if you screw up, you can erase it and start over again. And those are on the pylons, so they have very faint lines.
Right.
And it just adds up just a little bit of detail, especially on large areas where there's not a lot of detail. So you just need something there.
Yeah, yeah, and it works. It helps your brain realize that scale because, of course, in the 3D model, you could kind of have all the etchings embedded, but then you lose some of that work that your brain automatically thinks of when you see something that's more of a pencil drawn or something that's
Right.
carbide blade or something.
Right. You stand here, you can't tell the difference between the scribe line or the pencil.
Yeah.
You really have to get up next to it to see it. But
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about the lighting system as well. You know, fiber optics were a big part of original shipbuilding. I see some animation here, so you assume more modern technologies.
yeah, it runs on an Arduino programmed board, which does all the effects for the navigation strobe and flashing beacons. And that's just a timing board that I have built into the secondary hull. And it's just a general thing I've been using on most of my ships because it's basically the same pattern I like to use. I've got a triple beacon on the bow and stern. There's a double beacon, top and bottom, and a single port and starboard. And that's kind of like my system. And then within each engine, there's a separate Arduino board, one that controls the warp effect light, which is kind of a bouncing wave effect back and forth, and then another one which does the same kind of thing within the Bassards. There's kind of an orange-red kind of undulating thing going on. And as well as the engine or the impulse engines have a little bit of a flicker animation with an orange and red kind of a transitioning thing. So a little bit of animation going on for visual interest, as well as I put some fiber optics in various spots just for visual interest again and breaking up a large area where there's like nothing there. But hey, you might need to benefit from a little bit of light, whether it's a spotlight or some sort of self-illumination thing, or in this case, there's like some very small fiber optics that are just flush to the hull.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're for. They just kind of look cool,
Well, something I love is that even in the lighting arrangement, lighting scheme, the different types of lights you're using allow for different luminance. And so it's not just evenly bright. And so as you're photographing it and you're exposing for the different lights, the lights are different levels of brightness, which I think bring a level of realism, believability.
Right. And it depends on what you're going for. If it's, it's in a contest room or if it's just in your home for a client, it could be whether in the daytime or nighttime. You don't want it too bright or too dim where you can't see it, in a brightly lit room. Yeah. Yeah. And there are controls on this to turn off the motors too, in case you don't want to listen to that buzzing noise of the motors, which can be annoying after a while.
Yeah. I see some depth you've added. Something I really love, not only what looks like film behind a window that adds extra layer of depth, but also just the way you kind of have recesses that you've designed in, so you illuminate and get some nice shadowing. So really taking advantage of the geometry, creating shadows and depths of spaces in here.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I've placed enough detail for the eye to find something of interest all over the model. And you mentioned the windows, and each of the window ports actually backlit with 35 millimeter slide film of a rendered image of the interior all over the ship. Wow. And so you can actually look in the window and see something going on.
Every single big window has a little bit of color, a little bit of interior.
Correct, yeah.
Wow. It's a beautiful design, beautiful ship. And I want to go from something that's TOS era all the way to the most modern, at least in the television era of Star Trek. And this is what's the latest Enterprise. It's the 1701-G, as seen at the end of Star Trek Picard. Spoilers, I'm apologizing. But this was previously the Titan.
It was. Yeah.
And before that, it was, the Shangri-La. Tell me about the Shangri-La, which is your design.
Right, that was a motion picture era Starship that I had designed just for fun 8 years ago to be an entry for this contest in this room 8 years ago, and it won a gold that year. And Terry Matalas, the showrunner of Picard, discovered it on Instagram and really liked the design and had asked me to build him one because I had sold the original. And so it was between I was working on season 2 and 3 of Picard, working on this model, and I get a text message from Dave Blass, who's a production designer.
Yes.
And found out that I had been working on this model for Terry, because Terry had suddenly thought of an idea of using that for the show. And I would assumed it was just like a background model prop, and behind Geordi somewhere in some office, one episode.
Yeah.
And they wanted to see it mocked up with Picard era engines. I go, oh, okay, I can do that. So I quickly did a Photoshop thing where I had an extra Stargazer engine left over from season 2.
Yep.
And Photoshopped something very quickly just to give them an idea what it might look like. The next morning, I get a reply from that message I sent back saying, "Yeah, we're good to go. We like it." I'm like, I had no idea, like it for what? And like, yeah, we want this to be the hero ship for season 3. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then of course they asked, well, send over the digital asset. We'll get this to visual effects. I'm like, there's no digital asset. This is a hand-built, model that I scratch built. I can take a bunch of photos, but I don't have it. There's no 3D model. So they were on their own to, put that together, rebuild it digitally, and they had a week to do it. And it was very quick. So they were going from season 2 to season 3 back to back, and they needed to get the hero ship in production right away for all the on-screen LCARs and that sort of thing. And so it was rush.
Well, it's so distinctive, and I think the thing that they maybe gravitated towards so much, which the fans, and I certainly gravitated toward, is the way you design that cutaway in that hull. So you have your Constitution, very familiar, NC-101A style on the exterior, but that cutaway is, and the strength of this, where you have an extension from the bridge, is so it's so stunning. And then you said the Stargazer nacelles. So people might not know, but you did some of the fabrication work along with Sean Charlesworth and our team for background ships that were in the captain's ready room
in season 2.
In season 2 of the new Stargazer.
Right.
That was that gold plated and put in the back. And that's where you had those parts.
Exactly. Some extra ones left over. Yeah.
Wow. And that was the origin of what's now the latest Enterprise.
Yeah. They were used on several ships. I mean, we saw also the Intrepid, which was another design of mine that Terry saw they liked. And of course, they got retrofitted with those engines again. Yeah. So that became the standard look of the aesthetic of the 25th century Starfleet ship, was those engines and that bridge, which made sense because they reused that bridge for several ships.
Yes.
So they reused the same set.
Which kind of makes sense in the logic of the canon that the Federation would have modular for refit.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Dave Blass has posted many stories about why the Titan would get refitted to look like a Neo Constitution here.
Sure.
And so this has now come full circle, because that digital model that was created by the show was then what you use as a basis to make this ship.
Correct. Yeah. This is the visual effects model in physical form. It took quite a while, but yeah, it was broken apart to be made printable, hollowed out, parted out into several pieces so you can glue it together and actually run lighting through it, and then printed at this scale for lighting. And this one will go to Terry Matalas. This is what he requested for himself as his own personal model.
It has all the fixings and all the trappings of a Bill Krause, of an AdmiralBuck ship, on all the electronics. And and this one does, of course, have all the Aztecing on top as well.
Yes. Originally the Titan A, and then eventually we find out it's renamed the Enterprise. Of course, he wants the Enterprise G, so that's what it is. So there's no difference between the two other than the decal. It says Enterprise.
Yeah, so that makes all the difference. Names are important.
Names mean everything.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely. Well, Bill, congratulations, first of all,
Thank you.
On your achievements, on your beautiful ships being exhibited here, all the way back to origins of your first time exhibiting here at WonderFest. Right. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
You as well.
Yeah, and we'll share where people can find more information about your ships in the description below. So thank you so much.
Thank you.